Hi everyone. On this edition of Scouting for Growth, I will be joined by Dr. Avi Baruch, co-founder and COO of Previsico, and Jonathan Jackson, co-founder and CEO of Previsico. Previsico is a surface water flood forecasting specialist, enabling people and organizations to minimize the impact of flooding. Flooding cost the global economy more than $82 billion in 2021, accounting for nearly a third of all losses from natural catastrophes. And this is reported by Swiss Re Institute in a 2022 study. Estimates from Statista shows that 29 million people were affected by flooding in 2021, and we believe this number will increase in 2022. Flooding is the second largest weather-related perils after droughts. During the course of the podcast, Avi, Jonathan, and I discussed a number of topics. Flooding and the difference between natural hazard and man-made disasters, Previsico's 4-step method to reduce flood risk, build back better and why we ought to protect the small and medium-sized business from flooding, protect, predict, and prevent, and top tips to reduce the risk of flood. And if you like this podcast, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and comment, as well as leave me a little message as to what else you want to listen to. So let's dive in. Good morning, Avi and Jonathan. Welcome to Scouting for Growth. How are you doing this morning?
Very good indeed. Good to see you again, Sabine.
Great to see you, Jonathan. Hi, Avi. So the way I start the podcast is getting to know you a little bit better. So I'll start with you, Jonathan. So can you tell us who you are, what you do every day as a CEO of Previsico, and what got you to what you do today?
It's a lot there, Sabine, but anyway, I'll try and unpack it all. So certainly, yeah. So Jonathan Jackson, I'm the CEO of Previsico, and my role is like most CEOs of an early stage business, kind of jack of all trades, get involved in lots of different things. My background is I'm a commercial individual, so I come as a sort of a seasoned entrepreneur is one way to look at it. This is my full startup business, so I tend to find myself getting pretty much focused around driving the sales side of things and getting the business really moving forward in terms of the structures and the processes. And the team in place. We're a little bit different because we're a spin out from a university, which has some great advantages, and as much that there's a lot of research work done behind the product, which makes starting a business an awful lot easier if you've got a product which is pretty much there, which we did, which is fantastic. But similarly, there's also the fact that you have to look at that whole team piece, and we were really lucky to get some great academics in both Avi and Dapung who spun out with the business from the university, and so yeah, that's I guess those are the main things that I'd say we focus on here.
Thank you, Jonathan. Avi, I know you are a researcher. You have a PhD, so tell us who you are and how you use all this amazing brain of yours every day.
So yes, I did my PhD at Loughborough University, and working with Professor Yu on kind of mostly flood information and how that can be used to help people on the ground be more resilient to flooding. And after my PhD, carried on with some research, but quickly realized that the main technology that Dapung was building, so he was leading a team of academics to develop a live flood forecasting technology which can capture surface water flooding. I was kind of involved in that project, and I saw it had a lot of potential, and so kind of after a few months after my PhD, realized that academia probably wasn't for me, and also saw so much potential in the kind of the technology we were building, and felt that the only way to really get it to be used effectively on the ground was to create a spin-out company. And so what we started doing is kind of exploring the market, and we explored quite a few different markets kind of while we're still at the university on which market would be best to approach. There were so many different areas where early warnings for flood can benefit. So we realized there were quite a few different areas. There was a lot to still figure out, but it was certainly worth really putting our all into it, because we really felt that it could work really effectively. And that's really where we met Jonathan, who we realized we also needed in the team to help really build up a very successful business and kind of take the technology forward.
Thank you. So, I was looking at some of the statistics which are there. So, for example, I dive into Statista, and Statista estimate that 29 million people were affected by flood in 2021. I guess we are going to get soon the 2022 numbers. We're just starting the year, and is the second largest weather-related event, right after drought. According to the research, they also say that it's the second largest cause of natural disaster after storm. And I think the estimate were around 75 billion USD in 2021. I checked one of the recent studies from Swiss Re, which estimated that to 82 billion USD dollars in 2021. So my question for you is, obviously, flood risk is a major issue globally, right, when you look at weather events. So how are you approaching the problem, and where are you starting affecting people and their lives by applying your technology? Who goes first?
I was going to say, Avi, do you want to take that, or shall I?
I'll have a first stab. And so our approach to this is that flood risk is rising. There's more extreme weather. The weather's more volatile. There's the climate change is driving heavier downpours, particularly in the summer, and longer, wetter winters. And so, in terms of the hazard, we know the hazard is rising, and there's a really accurately describe what the situation is. But you said one word which I always have a pet peeve about, which is the word natural disaster, because we really strongly believe there's no such thing as a natural disaster. There's natural hazards, and then there are human disasters. And what you can do, if you know where the hazard is going to be, and if you are able to prepare for it effectively, it doesn't need to be a disaster. And so, in order to reduce flood risk, I think there are four main steps that we really encourage you take. Step one is to firstly understand your risk. So there's a lot of really good risk modeling products already out there on the market. Then the second step is to then, once you understand your risk, to invest in the right resilience measures. That could be taking flood defenses, could be setting up things like non-return valves. And then thirdly is having a flood action plan. So knowing what to do when you're expecting a flood, moving stock, turning electricity off, who's responsible for that response. And finally, the most important one is using an early warning system. And the early warning system is really the final part of the jigsaw in terms of building flood resilience. And if you take all those steps, you can substantially reduce the risk and hopefully prevent a disaster from ever occurring. And I think we really strongly believe that if people are able to take those 4 steps ahead of an event and prepare for it effectively, there'll never be a disaster. There'll only be natural hazards. And so that's kind of those 4 steps, that's where we feel there's such an opportunity to be taken to reduce risk. And there's, the market, there's some really good risk products out there. There's a growing number of risk products out there. But I think the both the insurance market, but then also corporates, councils, members of the public, there's so much that we still have to do in terms of actually preparing for events. And so that's our focus.
And I think it's important, right? The clarity of your definition between natural events or perils and man-made disasters, I think, a very important one to actually acknowledge, because we as people are doing a lot of things to affect the weather and the planet in some ways or shape. So, Jonathan, when you look at what you are doing, guys, and I get there are 4 steps into the process you're implementing. Can you go into a little bit deeper around how you start affecting people's life with Previsico's technology and modeling capability and the insurance companies you're working with?
Sure, yeah, and it's one of these things which is a case where if people are used to having flood and manage and having to cope with flood, they tend to know what to do, and so our solution is just a great value add that we can bring to that situation. So, if you're living in say somewhere like Hebden Bridge up in Yorkshire, which has suffered repeated floods, poor people, they know that they need to have a flood plan, and they have to have these flood resilience measures, and then are looking for flood warnings. And where they sit today is that, when it comes to surface water flood, that's where we can really add the value for them. They're getting their Environment Agency flood warnings for river flood. And so by bringing in Previsico's warnings, it gives them that extra layer of warning to help them, therefore, make sure that those plans are put into action. So, as Avi said, there's resilience measures are often really simple things as well. So just turning off your gas, you're turning off your electricity, turning off your water, that alone can save a huge amount. Moving your car to a safer place, etc. So really, really simple stuff that makes a huge difference. And as I say, people in those sort of communities, where back in 2015 they would be closed down for maybe 6 months after a flood, they're now reopening after 3 days. It's a massive change, just a massive change, because they understand what to do. So that's the best case scenario where our warnings have the maximum value. And then when you look at other communities which are not used to flood, that's where it gets more challenging, because if you get a warning, you've got to know what to do with the warning. So just say to somebody, there's a risk of flood in 3 hours' time. If people don't know what to do, then they're probably not going to be able to do an awful lot about it. So I think what's really important is that the government now, as a result of COP26, really made a big play around the fact that the UK government cannot defend the country against flood. The country has to learn how to adapt to flood, and adaptation means starting to take responsibility for flood plans, flood resilience measures. That's being backed up by the insurance industry, making some really important moves in terms of build back better. So where a property has been hit by flood, that homeowner will be given up to £10,000 additional funding by a number of insurers to help them put in flood resilience measures to protect against flood going forward. So all of those things are really important. And so the more we can educate people around what to do when they receive a flood warning, the actions they need to take, and how to respond to mitigate that loss, that's the really key piece for us. So a lot of what we do right now, we are working with the organizations who are knowledgeable about flood, who know that they have to have flood action plans, etc. And we're seeing some great results with those organizations. Similarly, we're seeing great results with communities. So we work with a community called Whaley Bridge up in Lancashire, and it's just wonderful, absolutely wonderful to see that from a community which in 2015 had 300 properties flood. Now they're in a situation, because of our services, that they are warned of flood, and they've managed to prevent flood hitting the village on I think 7 or 8 occasions now. And it's a really simple thing in that particular instance. They have a culvert that goes through the village, and that culvert has a trash screen. And in the front of that trash screen, what happens is it gets, as water comes down, lots of trash debris starts to build up, which is causing the flood. So what we have is, in that particular instance, is we use the Previsico sensor to help alert the flood warden. The flood warden comes down and she'll clear the trash from the screen and averts 100% of flood. It is just a wonderful example of how you can help a community where the community understands and knows how to respond when they receive those warnings.
So, Avi, should people not live on floodplains? I mean, I heard what Jonathan just said, that at the end of the day, all of us need to start protecting ourselves around flooding. But the UK, for example, is an island, and I'm sure you guys are working with companies in the United Kingdom and overseas. And so my question to you is, should we stop living by floodplains and not have fancy houses by the sea?
I think there's two parts to that question, which is, should we carry on building on floodplains, and what do you do with the homes already on floodplains? And I think obviously there's two very different answers in those cases. Especially in my view has always been that we shouldn't be building on new developments on floodplains, especially when we haven't fully addressed some of the impact that flooding will have on those properties. So sometimes new housing developments can be a bit short-sighted. In areas where there's already a flood risk, obviously that's where you have FEMA and in the US, Flood Re in the UK, aiming to provide affordable insurance for those. But again, those schemes will eventually, again, they will be phased out. And so that's where property level flood resilience is just so important, so people can, when, be prepared and take action when it does flood. So that's particularly where, the resilience measures can play such a big role. So I think that those are two really important areas. But I think there's also a common, when floodplains often attract a lot of attention. But again, what we also know is in the UK, 1 in 3 homes at risk of surface water flooding. A very similar statistic in the US, and for those, again, those aren't traditional floodplains. Those are just, again, streets all around the country. And so I think it's it's about building on floodplains, but it's actually so much more than that. It's also about a bit about our mindset on how we understand where floods can occur, and then what we do to help people prepare for them. So I think there's a lot that can be done on the kind of engineering front on that, but then a lot more that then also has to be done on the household level and the individual site level.
And Sabine, what I'd just add into that as well is that, it's fine for Avi's answer is absolutely correct, but the fact is as well is that there is a huge amount of pressure around building houses in this country, and organizations, what's happening is that you're getting councils, etc., who are allowing planning to be given to areas which are at risk of flood. And the interesting thing is, it almost becomes a bit of a decision point for the insurance industry in a way, is that clearly people aren't going to want to have a house if they can't get insurance. And so, it's the insurer who actually has quite a say in whether that house is considered to be at a flood risk which is reasonable, because that's the other key part that's now coming out, which is, at what point is being in a floodplain of such risk that it's uninsurable versus one where actually the insurer is willing to take it.
So, Avi, I really want to hear from you on the need for surface water flooding capability. And before we go into that, I would like for everybody to understand what flooding means and the type of floodings that are. And then you can actually explain to us what is your specific focus. So often we hear about the fact that there are river floods, we have coastal floods, storm surges, urban and inland floods, and flash floods. So tell us how you play in the flooding arena.
Yeah, so I think that's a really good question. One should have clarified earlier. Surface water flooding, in essence, is flooding where heavy rainfall overwhelms local drainage systems. And so it can happen anywhere. I think we've all seen it on roads. if you're driving around the country on a very wet day, you can see some roads being overwhelmed. And so it can really happen in so many parts of the country, and it's very difficult to find anywhere in any country that is really immune to the risk. It does occur everywhere. And often, especially in kind of risk mapping exercises, small streams also kind of classified as part of the surface water risk. So when we look at river risk, we're normally talking about the large river systems. And so it's one of those areas where it might not always be on the news because it is so patchy and occurs across the whole country, but it is the largest risk and does pose the largest impact.
So following on to that, can you actually explain why companies now need to really understand how one moves from protection to prediction to prevention? Because you guys can combine device, data, and predictive analytics to actually prevent, or at least create warnings so that people can take better decisions. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, and I think this is where there's some really good steps have been taken in the last few decades on reducing flood risk from rivers and coastal flooding in many areas. And this has largely been due to an improvement in understanding of river dynamics and really good flood defense schemes being kind of affordable and heavy government investment in them. And so there's been a series of substantial government investments in river flood defenses. And what that's done is it's massively reduced the amount of river flooding and the impact of river flooding. And I think it used to be that I think back in 2015-16 floods in the UK, for example, there were more properties affected by flooding than were defended by flooding. So I think it was, whereas now it tends to be massively skewed towards being defended. So there's been such a substantial change in the number of properties being protected from flooding during major kind of heavy rainfall events. And so we've become so much more sophisticated in protecting our major river systems and our coastal flooding. There's still a lot of work to be done. And I think it's really important not to be complacent. But another area which is, a growing number of climate risk assessments are also enabling us to start planning ahead for rising river levels and coastal flooding due to climate change. And so it's not just that presently, but we have the tools in place to be able to build resilience to future climate change in both the rivers and the coastal flooding. The challenge with surface water is because it can happen everywhere, you can't set up defenses everywhere. And also rapid land cover change, but also the fact that climate change is driving more extreme volatile weather, we're going to get more flash floods and more flash floods in areas that we've never previously experienced them. And because of that, it's surface water flooding is the one that actually it's not going to be going away. It's going to be getting a lot worse because it's one that's really, it's so dynamic and it varies from event to event. And it's also one where traditional methods of risk mapping also struggle to capture it because there's so many assumptions that go into any risk model, and with more volatile extreme events, those are always going to be challenged. And so what we do is our technology, we simulate each event as it's approaching using the latest rainfall forecasts and the land cover geology elevation, and run our simulations across the landscape and complement it again with that sensor data that we have on the ground with our customers. And using those technologies together, we're able to then provide very tailored localized flood predictions, which are specific to each storm as it's approaching.
That's superb. So one thing is for you guys to be able to do that, you have to partner with others, right? And I think it's going to be very important for me also to highlight the device you use as we release this discussion around what the device looks like and how the device captures the information as it goes and help predict, prevent, and create the warning so that people can take better decisions. But Jonathan, when you look at the way you're building your platform and your activities, you need partnership. You need to build your own digital ecosystems. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and how you collaborate with others to create something which is super unique out there?
Sure. We absolutely do need those partnerships, Sabine. For us, it's across the piece as well. So we're already partnering with insurers. So we have partnerships in place with the likes of Zurich and Liberty, where they're going out introducing us to their customers, so we can help support their customers. Generali is another one who's doing a great job on that front. And then also we have other insurtechs, so people like Geosite, who we're delighted to recently announce our partnership with them. GWT Insights, in terms of their smart building tech that they have. So yeah, those partnerships are really key, and for us, we kind of see ourselves as being part of a jigsaw. We're not the whole jigsaw, but we're just an important piece in that jigsaw. And so, some really interesting partnerships that we have are sometimes with existing platforms who have a range of services on there already to do with flood and other catastrophes. And what we do is we literally are just plugging that gap around surface water flooding. So they'll already have river, coastal flood, etc., but they know that they've got a gap in surface water. And in other instances, we are taking a role of actually trying to bring together other organizations to work with us for a client. So we have a situation with a large industrial property company who asked us to sort of take the lead and bring in risk engineers to come and look at do flood risk assessments, and then also to bring in flood defense companies who could then provide the flood defenses. So yeah, we try to be as supportive in that partnership piece as we possibly can. Where it makes sense for us to take a lead, we're happy to do that. But similarly, where we simply act as a support mechanism to another partner taking the lead, that's great. And to your point about the ecosystem, the more that can grow and develop, the better, because there is so many opportunities that we see out there to collaborate and create something where the whole is definitely better than the sum of the parts.
That's super. I would love, actually, Jonathan, for you to highlight an example you've shared with me in the past, which is understanding really the challenge for small businesses around flooding. And now I know you can actually get back a business together in 3 days. But I remember some of the numbers you shared with me around some of those businesses and the losses flooding can create for a business which is not well prepared or insured against.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's a pretty staggering stat that actually exists in both the UK and the US, which is 40% of businesses never reopen after a flood. That's small and medium-sized businesses. So, that's just a huge amount. And you think in ESG terms, most people think about, flooding from an E point of view, the environment, but actually this is where flood has a massive impact on the social side. If you're a community and you lose 40% of your small businesses, imagine what that does to that community in terms of ripping apart the employment situation there. The council will suddenly lose income, so the council in turn won't be able to provide the sort of services and support that it would normally do so. So it's a really huge issue. And build on that as well is that you're 9 times more likely to suffer mental health issues having been through a flood as well. For a small business owner, it's a huge thing. So you've got this massive risk of losing your business. You've got a massive risk of having some serious mental health challenges. And then, as I say, there's the whole community piece as well. The average flood loss in the UK here, according to the ABI, is around about £70,000. For a small business, £70,000 worth of loss is brutal, and hence why, again, it's a really big deal. And these businesses, if you get hit by a flood, it's not unusual to you can't start your business again for another maybe 4, 5, 6 months. So that business interruption loss, again, really, really significant.
Yeah, I can see that. Avi, give us some top tips. So I know you have a framework you shared with us earlier, right? With 4 steps around understanding, developing resilience measure, and developing flood action plan. And then 4th, delivering or being aware of early warnings. So if you were going to look at 2 different communities, people out there with houses which may actually suffer from surface water flooding, and the insurance companies you're working with and companies you may work with in the future, what are your top tips for our community?
So I think you correctly outlined there's lots of different people who can use this in very different ways. And so I think a few kind of general principles is on being aware of the existing flood risk data out there. So again, most government portals do provide their flood risk assessments for free, and those are really useful for, again, to help people raise awareness. I think insurers often have some really detailed insights that aren't always available to the customer, and I do think the customers would massively benefit from more kind of sight of some of those risk assessments. I think especially on the commercial side, a lot of insurers are increasingly starting to notice that and actually use that effectively. So I think it's again, that in terms of understanding the risk, understanding where you can get really good risk information, the fact that if you need to, you can carry out a detailed site survey. Obviously, that's more on the commercial side where that can be really valuable. And then on the kind of the flood action plan and flood defenses, there's a lot of good new technologies out there. One, I think it's really important to note that there's still on the news as such an emphasis on sandbags, whereas actually sandbags have quite widely been disproven as they're really ineffective. And there's some really easy, low-cost technologies out there, floodgates, there's kind of inflatable sandbags, there's non-return valves. So there's far better tools than sandbags at preventing flood. And actually, even if you don't have any defenses at all, and I certainly wouldn't recommend this or put this on any insurance policy document, but even everyday items like duct tape, like Wellington boots, so putting a table in Wellington boots, moving stuff off the ground, is that sort of stuff that can actually make a massive difference at the property level. And so you don't actually, investing in proper flood defenses is really valuable, but at a household, if you don't have a budget for it, and if you're actually not at that high risk, even understanding that actually even with a little bit of duct tape, you could actually probably save a lot. I think that's really important to be aware of. And then in terms of kind of the flood action plan, I think it's really important to understand that there are kind of no regrets actions you can take, and then kind of more substantial decisions. And especially for a business with a flood warning, informing the team and just checking that everyone is aware that there's an incident expected later in the day helps everyone be prepared and understand what they will need to do. That's a sort of a no regrets action. Checking how many cars are in the car park and understanding where you might need to move them to is a no regrets action, because it doesn't really affect your day-to-day operations, and it just helps you massively be far more prepared when the event occurs. Obviously, shutting down your entire store, spending a few hours setting up defenses, that is a far more substantial decision that, again, can make such a big difference. But at least it is really important to help people understand that you don't always have to rush to that decision straight away, especially if it's just a minor alert. So it's really important just to bear in mind that there's so much that you can do even with very little effort. And I think that's important for members of the public to understand, but also insurers to understand in how they support their customers, to say, there is an elevated risk of flooding today, and these are things that you should be aware of. And obviously these are things you could do as the event, really is approaching. So I think there's different action you can take based on different levels of severity of that warning.
Superb. You know what? When I arrived in the UK, I didn't realize why I needed my Wellington boots, but I promise you, I bought my pair and I love them.
Excellent.
So to go toward the end of our discussion, Jonathan, I would love for you to tell us how big is the team, what are your plans for the future, and where we can find Previsico today.
So yeah, the team is now getting up to 26 people, which is great to see. And we're continuing to grow the business, both in terms of the team as well as in terms of the scope of what we're doing. So to that point is that we've very much focused on the UK to start off with, but at the end of last year we launched in the US. So we're now providing service from kind of Boston down to Washington DC, and then expand the service out from there. And we've also just had our first order for Italy, so we're looking forward to starting to work in mainland Europe as well, which is great. And I think for us, there's so much of our focus is around two core elements about what we do. One is the accuracy of the service. So our absolute obsession is how can we provide the best accuracy we possibly can, and we know that there's certain things that are in our control and out of our control. So one of the things out of our control is weather forecasts. So we're always looking for the best weather forecast provider. And then similarly, also the other thing is around sort of local conditions. So right now, we don't know if a drain is blocked. And so if we can find out where those locations are, where there is a tendency for a drain to block, and be able to put in things like our sensors, then that's a really fantastic way for us to help improve on that front. And then there are various things around the performance side as well. We see, the fact that we're currently producing a forecast at 25-meter resolution. We're looking to drive that down to 10-meter resolution. We're producing a forecast every 3 hours. We'd love to speed that up, so it's not just every 3 hours, it's getting down to every hour. So these are all the areas where we are just really focused in terms of providing the very best warnings that we can to help people mitigate those losses.
Thank you. Avi, last word for you. Where can we find you? You as a team.
So we've got two main offices, one in Loughborough, one in London. So we're often in London, but in terms of people reaching out, you can find us on LinkedIn or by email, so info@previsico.com. You can check out our website and request a demo. So really delighted to kind of, as we said, looking for more partners, more people to join our team. And so again, if you're interested in learning a little bit more, we'd be delighted to talk to you.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Avi. I think it's going to be important for people to be more aware around the danger and the risk of flood. This is not going to subside. That is going to increase, whether man-made or weather-related. So thank you for your time, and looking forward to seeing you very soon.
Excellent.
Thank you, Sabine. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
If you like this podcast, subscribe now, share with your friends, and if you enjoyed it, please give it a 5-star review. Also, if you want to cover any specific subject with me, contact me on Instagram under Sabine VdL Officials or LinkedIn under Sabine VdL. Thank you.